Yeah, no clapper today, I'm guessing. Just the clapper of the real clapper.
Exactly. I'm here at the American Airlines Lounge. So I got that going for me, Pete.
Well, the good part is you don't have a stairway or bathroom behind you like you have in the past where the door's flying open, guys are running around screaming back and forth, hey, what's going on with that guy? You got a good spot.
And only once, Pete, have I had anybody give me crap about doing it. And I looked at the guy and I said, how many different people here are on Zoom calls? And he goes, well, a lot. And I said, and what is the exact difference? And he kind of wandered off. I mean, he was working for American, and he kind of wandered off then, because he's like, are you broadcasting? And I said, yeah. He said, you can't do that here. And I looked around and I go, well, apparently you can.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
But anyway, folks, thanks for joining us. Episode 279 in the books. Jared is back, and that's why we've got the market ticks as well as the sports and macro minute, fantastic futures, all of these various things stacked up on there, as well as any audio clips that he might add here, like that.
Gotta love
but
it.
we thank you for joining us, folks, and we're going to dive right into the macro minute. And the macro minute, Pete, I just couldn't resist, because over the weekend, ABC had a poll that has former President Trump up 10 points on the sitting president. And at any of the, I'll say, left-leaning outlets, that was called, Pete, what did they call it? A slight edge. And I'm thinking, the guy's a sitting president and he's down 10 points. That ain't a slight edge. But so that's my macro minute, Pete. What you got?
My macro minute is something that I brought up last week, and hopefully people listened and understood, because I talked about volatility and the volatility index. John, on September 13th, which is not that long ago, 12 days ago, we were sitting at a 1268 was the low that day. We were in the 12s, underneath 13, obviously. Today, 1841 is what we hit. Now we're back towards the middle 17s, lower 17s. But keep an eye on that, folks. We already warned you about it, the fact that it was going to go there. And I think the next stop is going to be 20 on the next violent move to the upside for the volatility index. So I think it's something to be very aware of, and that doesn't mean it's a negative necessarily. You can use that in a positive way, because with implied volatility going up, if you're somebody who does the most clearly done trade in the options world, a buy right, you're buying stock and you're selling calls, you're going to get a little bit more premium, because those volatilities are also going to likely move along with the VIX to the upside.
Absolutely correct, Pete, and great call by you. Foreseeing that possibility. All right, let's talk about fantastic futures.
Yeah.
Fantastic futures.
Well, the CME was out there with us, with Pete and I, out in Vegas when we did that event for charity through Velocity and Guardian Trading. And it was nice to see the CME showing some support out there, Pete. CBOE was flying the colors as well. So thumbs up to both of them. The future, I'm going to say in 10 seconds, Pete. 10-year bond, 4.53. We hit 4.53%. That's a new high. And that's my fantastic future.
Yeah, the 2-year, the 10-year, they're both just screaming to the upside, John. A little bit of pullback here and there, but I mean, the direction has been north, and that's continued. I'm going to hit you up with this one. You mentioned the CME and the CBOE being at this charity event we were speaking at.
Did we lose Pete, Jared?
And it was great. But the part that I really loved, John, was talking to the CME guys and the volumes. Where is the biggest volume? Well, it's over there in crude. You take a look at crude. It wasn't too many days ago, we were actually knocking on the door of 94. Now here we are pulling back underneath 90. So it's moving around. There's no doubt about it. I still think the direction is going to be higher, but those steps forward are starting to match the steps backwards right now. We'll see. I continue to think that we will see crude in the $100 area in the not too distant future.
Okay, I agree. We're going to see it, Pete. It's just a question of when. All right, let's dive in, if we can, Pete, into what's going on with the writers' strike, because apparently settled. I don't know the exact details, but we all know they were fighting for higher comp. They wanted to get streaming residuals that they weren't getting in the past. Seems logical that they should. Transparency about viewership data. Be careful what you wish for there, because if you're somebody like Pete and I, you know that there's a lot of places, perhaps even like our former employer, that they don't even want to see those numbers anymore, Pete. But this is affecting Disney, Paramount, WBD, as well as Amazon and Netflix today.
Yeah, it is affecting them, but it's interesting to watch and see exactly how this thing is playing out right now. And it's interesting to see that it's really not having a huge effect. You would think maybe that this is positive news. You'd think maybe you'd see a nice spike maybe out of a Disney or something like that. Maybe Warner Brothers, maybe whomever, Paramount. Really not seeing a whole heck of a lot. Netflix, on the other hand, is positive, but I think that that's also has a lot to do with what that direction has been of late and the movement back and forth. Maybe it's affecting them a little bit to the positive, but not huge effects on any of those stocks. We didn't see a lot of option paper in most of those names either, John. So it's something that's been kind of quietly in the backdrop and continues to be quietly back there, despite the fact that it looks like they've got a settlement after 150 days.
Yeah, it's historically their longest strike that they've had. So let's also talk about Amazon, except even though we just spoke about them this much because of the writer's strike, we all know that that's a loss leader for Amazon. The Prime actually makes the money on, and of course, their Amazon Web Services. But Amazon deep, $4 billion deep, Pete, into AI. And this is like a wake-up call for a lot of the firms. Obviously not for Microsoft, they're already in. Not really for Google, they're already in. But for a lot of the other tech stocks that just kind of bandy about the term artificial intelligence, this is a wake-up call. And Amazon is going to have a minority position, but you know what that means. They can take the whole thing down if they decided to.
Oh, they can do what they want, John. They've got such a great balance sheet. I mean, we do talk about this stock a lot. We've seen a lot of option paper in there. Some of it's positive. It's moved immediately, but then all of a sudden pulls back a little bit. So this is a stock that not too long ago was trading over 140. Here we are backed up again. It's right around 131. It's having a pretty decent day. Not a huge day, but up a couple of percent. So they'll take that. But I think the reality is this $4 billion investment in this Anthropic, John, it just shows you that, first of all, Anthropic is one of those that, you know what, they got a cash burn. They need a partner, and they're getting that crucial partner. Between the two of them are really going to build something, I think, that could be pretty spectacular. What else would you expect from Amazon? AWS, as you said, that is huge. It's going to be a factor for a lot of different parts of Amazon. I think that'll be the biggest. They needed this as much as Amazon did, but I think that combination is going to be great. And when it's all said and done, I think this is really going to be a huge feather in the cap for Amazon going forward.
We don't disagree on that, Pete. I think this is the right move by them, the right move by Anthropic too, because of what you said about the cash burn. They need the cash. They also need that web services, Pete.
Yeah.
So they'll be a pretty big part of AWS as well, not just the offerings that they do through that. Mm-hmm. All right, let's talk about Williams Sonoma. Because this one, if you looked around at a bunch of retailers, Pete, this one might surprise you that it's been steady Eddie from the lower left to the upper right, as our friend Dennis Gartman used to say, all year. Yeah, it backs and fills from time to time, but really, I think this one has done pretty well. And now you've got an activist investor stepping in, even though they say for now, Pete, it's a passive stake. They must like what they see about the leadership team and everything else about Williams Sonoma, WSM.
I'll tell you what, I like a lot of what I see with Williams Sonoma, despite the fact that you might look at them, as you pointed out, John, you might look at it and say, wow, you know, this is fairly expensive type of company that people are trying to buy some of the things there. How's that going to do in the the economic situation that we're in right now and everything else? Well, it seems to be doing just fine. As a matter of fact, you look at this stock, it's up like 40%, John, year to date. It was 114 to start out the year. It hit a 52-week high today of over 154. So it's had a really nice jump. By the way, part of that jump, well, you take a look at that short interest, somewhere between 12, 16%, something like that. That's pretty big. You see numbers like that and a stock that's trading at a 10 PE. Yeah, I did say 10 price to earnings. There's a lot of reasons to be interested. Oh, by the way, their free cash flow is just under $1 billion. So there's a lot of things going on from the fundamental side. You can understand why Green wants to be a part of this whole deal. And I actually think that at some point, John, they might stay passive. I don't think they even have to get into that part where they start to squeeze them a little bit. I think they'll stay passive and just ride this wave.
Well, this would certainly be a good stock to be part of. And I wish, Pete, that it was part of my portfolio. Sadly, it is not. But I am definitely paying attention to that free cash flow that you mentioned. And last week, when you mentioned it in Bausch Health, BHC, I bought that. So maybe I'll do the same here. All right, let's follow up with a little bit on the EVs, because if you paid attention at all today, you saw that NIO was down, NIO, that VFS was down. That's that Vietnamese auto company that's worth more than Ford and GM combined. You'd notice that Polestar, which is a Volvo offshoot, is down. All of those stocks were down. And why is that? There were a lot of conflicting reports, Pete, about whether or not NIO was going to raise money. They were alleged to be out there looking for $3 billion. And then they came back and said, no, we're not looking for $3 billion. That's not the same as denying it, that you're not going after any money. Maybe they're only going after 2.7, Pete.
Yeah, I tell you, John, and I think of all those EVs and some of the conversations that people are having about some of what's going on over on that side of the planet, I think NIO is a pretty interesting one for a variety of reasons, but they do have an interesting balance sheet. They've got a boatload of cash, John. They also have a boatload of debt. And so you look at this company and you start to wonder, with the cash burn that they've got, how long can they be around? It's a great question. I don't have a great answer for it, but it's another one of these names where are the shorts going to be right versus those that are starting to fight against this thing. In the short term, we did have some option paper in there today, and they were buying some calls to the upside. So maybe somebody out there from that perspective, they're not necessarily saying, hey, long term, we think this thing's great. Matter of fact, it's fairly short term with these options, but we were seeing some calls being bought there. I did jump along with that call buying, John. Got a little bit closer than the strike they were going for. I think they were going for the 9s. I went for the 8.5s. But I like what we were seeing out of this from that standpoint. Do I think long-term NIO's going to be great? I don't. That cash burn is brutal. That debt is brutal. And they've got to make some changes there. But in the short term, we could see this thing maybe make a little bit of a run to the upside. It's trading near the highs of the days right now.
Well, I think those EVs and the fact that we might be cutting China off from some of the things they need in that supply chain, that could be a game changer for those Chinese EVs, and not a good game changer either.
Right.
All right, Pete. So with all the craziness, college football and pro football, what are we going to kick it off with today? And the pun is intended.
Well, we'll start off with college football, and it's something that you're not going to like hearing this. Because you and I have gone back and forth, and I never used the word poser, but I should have, because the posers went out to Oregon and found out a little something. And here's what bothered me the most, John. We both like Neon Dion, right? I think. I loved him when they hired him. Thought it was a great hire. I loved everything about it. I was the first guy on the bandwagon, but I'm also the first guy who got off the bandwagon once we got into the season and we saw what was playing out. Well, they got mad at Nebraska because Nebraska came walking out of the field and they stood on top of their buffalo. And that's a very offensive thing. Everybody's mad. Oh, God, that's offensive. I can't believe you would do that. That's disrespect. Well, they win the first 3 games against the juggernaut group of TCU, terrible, Nebraska, terrible. Colorado State, terrible. But now they're going up against somebody. They finally play a real team, Oregon. John, this was a track meet and showed what posers really look like when they're trying to run and they've got monkey on their back, because these guys, you need to crown them. That's exactly right. Crown them. Because, John, first half, 42-0 was the score. I'm telling you right now, if Oregon would have wanted to, they could have put up probably 70, which somebody else did yesterday in the NFL. But their team walked out pregame, and what did they do? They stood right on top of the same thing they complained about disrespect. They did exactly the same thing out there at Oregon. So that disappoints me, because if Dion is actually being real, he would have told his guys, absolutely don't do that. You don't do that. But they went out and disrespected. Well, that disrespect didn't last too long when they put up 520 yards on Colorado. Colorado just couldn't figure it out, John. It was 280 passing, 240 rushing. They had absolutely no answer for any of it. But the pregame speech from the Oregon coach was the best. When he says, guys, we're not out here for clicks. We're out here for wins. And let me tell you, who do you think he was talking about there? And Dion did react to that later on, which was pretty classic. But, John, next up is USC. So we'll find out if the posers continue to be posers, or do they bounce back? Do they have a shot against USC? You know, USC, for as good as they are, they don't look nearly as impressive as some of these other schools. So it could be a little bit better of a game. But you know what? The world loves SC right now, so it should be pretty interesting. John, what do you think? Am I wrong to say posers, or what's your thoughts after this week?
I think you were exactly right. Not about the posers part. I think you're exactly right about, and Dion said this himself well before the game. I think he said it after the Nebraska game. We're 7 or 8 dogs, as he calls stud players. We're 7 or 8 dogs away from being a top tier program. And I agree with that. I look at some of their guys, Pete, and the same complaints you make about the Vikings having small linebackers that can't stop the run. I think you could kind of glance around, sadly, the Colorado Buffaloes and see some of that same stuff on defense. They don't have the big pounders. They don't have the road graders that Kansas has on the offensive line either. And, as good as Shedeur Sanders is, you got to give him time. They didn't. He didn't have a horrible game, but define horrible, Pete says. His average completion was not great. His passing, Pete, let's see, what was he? He threw for 159 yards, 23 of 33. His QBR was 28. So there are some problems there, Pete.
Well, here's the biggest problem, John. Until they called off the dogs, which they did. I mean, I'll tell you what, if in the future Colorado got really good and they got angry and wanted to go back at Oregon or whatever, or however they want to do that, handle that whole thing, I'll tell you what, he called the dogs off after the first half. And then they literally just kind of went through the motions to be done with the game. And it was a little bit different than the next game we're going to talk about, John, which is the NFL. Who are some of the posers in the NFL? I'll give you a couple right now. The 49ers are the best, most complete team in all of football right now, the NFL. And there's no doubt. Somebody can argue with me all they want. They don't really know football if they want to make that argument, because Purdy looks great. McCaffrey's the best player in all of football. Their defense is unbelievable, from linebackers to the linebackers, the D-line linebackers and DBs, all unbelievable, right? I mean, they're just outstanding. That being said, you've got teams out there like the Denver Broncos. You want to talk about a bunch of posers. They got this clown for a coach who's a terrible guy, and people will say, what are you talking about? Everybody likes Sean Payton. Well, everybody other than the teams that when he was the head coach in New Orleans, and they had bounties on the players, that was just not okay. I mean, and I still to this day don't understand how that didn't get followed up a lot more than it did. But they did all of what they did in the offseason to try to fix what was broken, which was We gave Russell Wilson too much money. We gave him a bunch of draft picks. We ended up with a bunch of clowns. We went out on the free agency market. We overpaid probably for the players that we got. John, the Miami Dolphins put 70 points on them. 70 points in the NFL. I mean, is that just unbelievable? You want to talk about a bunch of posers. They should be embarrassed. They are embarrassed, and there's no excuse for what happened. And I'll tell you what, 726 yards of offense for the Miami Dolphins. John, they didn't run the score up. They actually completely stopped throwing the ball and started running. They ended up with 376 passing, 350 yards rushing. I mean, that's an old-fashioned butt kicking. What do you think of that one?
Well, if I were the headline writer for ABC or the Washington Post, Pete, I'd say they had a slight edge. The same guys that said, "Oh well, President Trump's only leading by 10 points. He's got a slight edge." I'd say, yeah, I'd say Miami had a slight edge over the Broncos. And you and I said it weeks ago before the season started. We said, calling out Hackett, the coach over there with the Jets, was just no class.
Right.
And apparently he was drinking the Kool-Aid, Pete, even more than the Colorado team. Maybe that's something to do with some of the edibles and so forth that are available in Colorado. But he was drinking the Kool-Aid. He was popping the gummies. He was doing everything because he thought they had a decent shot this season. They got no shot. They're a complete pretender. They suck. They're terrible. But I'll say that one of the teams that you played for is not as bad as them, and they might beat them twice this year, and that is the Raiders.
Oh,
The
gosh.
Las Vegas Raiders suck.
Yeah.
That is one of the worst football teams. Garoppolo, I don't even know what he's doing back there, Pete. He
Terrible.
doesn't know what he's doing back there. And, they had to pay up to get him, too. There wasn't much left. They probably should have gone for Flacco. But here he is back there, Pete. And, the whole time Chris Collinsworth saying, well, given the time that he's going to have to go to his first, and then he's not going to be able to check down. He's going to have to eat it or throw it away. And time again, he didn't. And instead he threw it. He threw it up to the Steelers. I mean, they were just feasting on that guy.
Well, I don't vision them as posers, though, because we thought they'd be bad, right? I mean, I think everybody coming into the season, you look at the Raiders and you go, but what have they done? They picked up Jimmy G, like you just said. That's it. They got rid of a really good quarterback, and they brought in, I don't know where you put Jimmy G, but you bring in Jimmy G as their quarterback. That's not very helpful. You didn't do all the things you needed, which is let's make this defense a real defense. That's why Derek Carr left. It's why he went to New Orleans. But I got one more real quick poser for you. Dallas Cowboys. Here's why.
Oh, yeah.
They beat the two big vaunted New York teams, one without Aaron Rodgers, who's, that ruined them. And the defense even can't figure it out after that, John. But also, they ended up with the Giants, right? And they beat them. They beat the tar out of them. Matter of fact, they drubbed them. What was it, 40-0, I think. They went out to Arizona, John. They finally played somebody outside of New York, and they didn't get their butts kicked. It was a good game. But Arizona's playing for the first pick in the draft. I mean, Arizona literally is trying to tank the season and still beat the Dallas Cowboys. While they're tanking, they beat the Cowboys. The Cowboys are a bunch of posers. I think Dak Prescott needs to go. There's a lot of guys out there that I'm not the only guy who says that, by the way, but I'm on board with it because you know what? They didn't get their butts whooped, but they are not a very good team that started out 2-0 against two posers themselves. And I don't know what the heck's going to come out the NFC East outside of Philadelphia. It's starting to show us that it's not that strong, John. Washington, Dallas, not so much. The Giants, you're really looking at a lot of guys where you're like, well, none of these guys are very good. Philly's pretty damn good, but past that,
I was going to say,
really?
I was going to say Philly's got to love it because, as we all know, you play people in your division twice. You do a home and away, and that's what works in the favor of the Raiders because they get to play the Broncos twice. By the way, Pete, do you think when the Broncos play Kansas City that Mahomes might put up 70 on them?
I'll tell you what, I was watching Kansas City yesterday, and they were an absolute machine. And Travis Kelce's out there catching balls and pointing up to Taylor Swift in the box and going, "Oh, here you are, sister." That turns out to be a for real deal. I really didn't. I thought it was all for fluff. I think it actually is real. I think that's suddenly become his girlfriend or whatever. And it's an interesting thing. And you know what? He is not doing the wrong thing going after a gal who's worth about $1 billion. That's for sure. I think that's the draw, by the way.
Which brings me back to Travis. Why the hell did you take the money from Pfizer?
Yeah.
For God's sake, that's an embarrassment. I mean, he's out there, Pete, getting paid, who knows, maybe $1 million, maybe more, to say, well, when you get your flu shot this year, how about if you get another COVID booster? How about if you drill my teeth while you're at it? I mean, just terrible. I mean, a lot of people have bad reactions to the booster as well as the vaccine. And then you're out there, this is what you're going to do, take blood money to try to push this thing. Again, you got a billionaire girlfriend. You're making a fortune. You really need that last mill that much. So, yeah, my opinion of him, even though it was up because of Taylor, Pete, it's down because of taking that money.
Yeah,
Blood
sometimes these guys do. They I don't know if they think through the whole thing, and they're just grasping at whatever somebody wants to throw them out there. And that I hear you talking, and it is interesting. I don't get it. There's a point where you got enough money, and let's be honest, he's the highest paid tight end in football or whatever. He's got money. Who knows what happens with her one way or the other or whatever, but she's got money too. But he's got enough on his own. So, he's got enough commercials too. But the son of a gun is a hell of a tight end.
Oh, he's a great tight end. And I bet on him in the Super Bowl and lost because freaking Mahomes tucked the ball and ran when he should have thrown the ball to Travis. And I would have won. So maybe I've got that working against him.
Yeah, you're ticked about that, maybe.
It still stings. Well, we will be back with another Rebel's Edge tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, everybody. I hope you join us then. I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.